Yo, Vapor Man here. My next guest is currently an adjunct professor at the School of Public Health and Preventative Medicine at Monash University, described by The Age as an anti-quackery crusader. You gotta love that. He is an advocate of evidence-based medicine and a critic of pharmaceutical marketing and unproven diet products, among others. He is El Presidente of Friends of Science in Medicine, and he received a damn Order of Australia in 2017. But, most importantly, he is a rational, logical, and principled individual who recently resigned from the Therapeutics Good Advertising Consultative Committee on Principle. And ladies and gentlemen, principle will be the topic of today's interview. I give you Professor Ken J. Harvey! Welcome to the show, Professor.
G'day, it's good to be here too.
You made a complaint to the TGA and were unsatisfied with the response. Now, I've been there. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, first of all, I've made numerous complaints to the TGA over the years. For the last 2 years, over about 110. But the one that you were talking about was actually stimulated by a colleague in Sri Lanka who complained about Australia exporting skin whitening preparations to Sri Lanka. And we haven't approved skin whitening preparations in Australia. Even the TGA hasn't approved them. And yet here they were being exported to Sri Lanka and other companies by an Australian company based in Sydney. And what did the TGA do about it to this complaint? Well, they said that they've got no jurisdiction to deal with complaints in Sri Lanka, and there was nothing they could do about it, which is bullshit, quite candidly, because this particular product was being packaged in Sydney. The package had on it skin whitening, which is not an approved permitted indication in Australia. The TGA could have raided the company. They could have confiscated the product on the grounds that it was illegal, counterfeit, breaching the Therapeutic Goods Act. But of course, they didn't, which is typical of the TGA.
Why does that not surprise me? Now, I don't know much about skin whitening. I don't really understand. Why do people in Sri Lanka want to whiten their skin? Does it have something to do with vitamin D deficiency or?
No. Why do people in Australia lie out in the sun and get melanoma? Because they think that a brown skin is sexy. Why do people in Asian countries who have brown skin want skin whitening? Because they think white skin is sexy. And indeed, this is the power of advertising, isn't it? You try to create a demand for things that are not readily part of the country that you're in. And so it's pure marketing craziness. So why do people in Sri Lanka want skin whitening creams? Because they think it's going to make them look European. And exactly the same reason why Australians go to tanning clinics and get melanomas.
Please excuse Vaporman's ignorance, Professor. I am an idiot. Next question. Mr. Skerritt of the TGA takes offence to the term parking fine being used to refer to penalties handed out to companies like Pharmacare, saying that $180,000 is a lot of money to an individual, which is true. But Pharmacare is not an individual. It's the umbrella company for brands like Nature's Way, BioGlen, Isocol, and I know personal favourites of yours, Professor, Slim Right, and Fat Blaster. We could be here all day going on about the company, but my question to you is an $180,000 fine a big deal for a company of Pharmacare's size?
Well, Pharmacare has reportedly got a revenue of around, $39 million a year. So a fine, and it's a one-off fine, of $100,000 is just mere cost of doing business. And in particular, Pharmacare has got the unenviable reputation of having had more upheld complaints, 3 times more upheld complaints than any other company, 3 times more than anyone else. And so Yeah, look, they have a reputation of producing shonky products, of producing claims like fat blasters and fat magnets that have not got no scientific validity. They laugh all the way to the bank, and the TGA just wraps them over the wrist with a wet feather occasionally. That's all. And what really annoys me is that TGA does nothing about the underlying problems, that fat blaster products don't work. Let's get rid of a whole lot of them. But hangover products don't work. Let's get rid of all of them. But oh, no, 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 no. These are companies making nice profits, and we'll occasionally slap a little fine on some of them.
Speaking of parking fines and fines for individuals, a multi-million-dollar company like Pharmacare gets slapped with a $180,000 fine. Vapers got 2 weeks' notice to let them know that if you imported nicotine, you'd get a $220,000 fine. These aren't corporations; these are individuals. So a $220,000 fine for an individual ain't a parking fine; it's a life sentence. Crazy to hear about all this sort of stuff, Professor.
Look, can I just say there is no logic here. The TGA put a fine of $25,000 on Pete Evans for flogging COVID machines or biocharger machines that were meant to cure or protect against COVID-19. That fine was the cost of one machine. So look, I agree with you. There is no logic. Some fines are ridiculous. Some fines, you could argue, are outrageous. And again, it makes you wonder about the logic being applied.
Couldn't agree with you more, Professor. In your opinion, what ought to be the role of the TGA versus what is the actual role of the TGA in your opinion?
Well, the TGA's role is to uphold the Therapeutic Goods Act, and the purpose of the Therapeutic Goods Act is to make sure that therapeutic products in Australia, that they work, that they are safe and they're effective. And as I say, it's quality, safety and efficacy. Now, I think on so-called high-risk products, most of the time, the TGA does a reasonable job, not all. There's certainly been concerns about, they've been very slow on pelvic mesh, breast implants, etc. But when it comes to products they think are not such high risk, and in particular, one of my interests is complementary medicines, then they are appalling because they allow all sorts of unsubstantiated claims. They don't get stuck into the companies, as we've said, and they just allow consumers to be ripped off. And again, it's hard to understand why that is so. Are they too close to industry? Is it because they're 100% funded by industry? Does that produce a conflict of interest? Oh no, says the TGA, the fact we're 100% funded by industry doesn't cause us any problems at all. But again, my argument is that if you look at the record of the TGA, some things, yes, they do reasonably well, but others, they do not.
Quick follow-up question to that answer you had there, Professor. What the hell is a pelvic mesh?
Oh dear. Well, if women have had lots of babies, they can get weakening of the pelvic wall and the vaginal walls, and they get things that we call prolapses, where unfortunately bits of your anatomy can start coming down. I mean, men get hernias, inguinal hernias and other things, and these need patching up. Again, there was a pelvic mesh. It's a bit like what you find around if you go into a fruit shop and you buy your mandarins or your oranges, you'll get some orange mesh holding them in, right? And that's the sort of thing that surgeons have used to repair prolapses, hernias and other things. Now, again, this is a medical device. It's meant to be regulated for quality, safety and efficacy. But a lot of these were used without proper testing. A lot of them caused problems, like they were eroding through the vaginal wall, and gentlemen having intercourse with their partners suddenly complained of that they were getting their penises scraped by raw mesh coming through the wall. Not very pleasant, I think you'll agree. So again, that's been a bit of a scandal. Again, breast implants, people wanted to make them rough so that the surface of them rough so that they wouldn't move around. I mean, if you're a woman and you're getting a breast implant, you don't want to end up with a boob in the armpit, which is what a roving breast implant can do. So again, they made them with lumps and bumps, but didn't test these very well and found that in rare but important cases, they were associated with a higher risk of producing cancer. So again, I mean, this brings us back, I think, to current concerns about vaccination and whatever. I mean, one of the problems we have in the therapeutic goods regulation area is that clinical trials can be quite short. Long-term complications often only emerge when the device or the vaccine or the medicine has been out there and put into hundreds and thousands of people. And this is a regulatory problem. It certainly means that regulation needs to be good in the beginning on clinical trials, but more importantly, it needs to focus on what we call post-marketing surveillance and following things up.
Well, Professor, I didn't know, and now I know, and now I'm sorry that I know.
Yes, well,
we have.
Can I just sort of say that we have got rid of most dangerous pelvic meshes and also the breast implants. A lot of them have been taken off the market now. So I think people can be reasonably reassured. But my message is new is potentially dangerous. And that's important for consumers to understand.
We have a vaccine coming up for COVID-19. It has been rushed or fast-tracked through vital approval processes. How important is it that the public can trust organisations like the TGA in times like these?
Well, clearly one needs to trust the regulators. And as I've said, I think with some exceptions, the TGA's got a reasonably good reputation, especially on so-called high-risk products like vaccines. Having said that, though, the point I was just alluding to is that new is potentially dangerous, that until products have been out there in the marketplace exposed to large numbers of people with, different comorbidities, different ages, et cetera, we don't really know the real problems. And so this is why I think it's not unreasonable that Minister Hunt is saying we're not going to jump into this vaccine straight away like Britain and some other countries are doing. We shall wait a few months and see what happens. And already, there are reports of a few deaths coming from the vaccines. Now, again, it doesn't appear to be different at this point in time from those who received a placebo and those who received a vaccine. But again, it was interesting that, the British authorities have just said, well, perhaps there's been some severe reactions in people that have got allergic tendencies and perhaps we shouldn't vaccinate those people. Again, the point is that, look, we don't really know the safety of these products until they've been in large numbers of people. And I think in Australia, we are in a very lucky situation. We've virtually reduced the incidence of COVID-19 to nothing. We can't be entirely confident of that. And obviously, there's always a danger from people flying in. But if the incidence is low, the need for a vaccine is not urgent, not at this particular point in time. Yes, it would be nice if we could get everyone vaccinated and then we could open up our borders, but it's sensible to wait. And it's sensible to see how this plays out in other countries while our risks are low. Because the whole business about therapeutic goods is it's a risk-benefit sort of ratio. There's always risks. You've got to weigh up small risks with big benefits. And that's why, obviously, a country like America, which has gone crazy because of its lack of public health stuff, a vaccine, putting it out there urgently is a more reasonable decision, and in England, than it is in Australia. So risks and benefits, but let's go slow in Australia.
Yeah, and as with other issues too, Professor, the canary in the coal mine that is the UK is something we should watch with bated breath. But if the canary is fine, then I think it's okay to go into the mine. And my next question is, and this may be a weird one for you because you're probably not so much into the vaping space, but are you or have you ever been in the employ of big tobacco or vaping lobbyists?
No, never to big tobacco, vaping, nor pharmaceutical companies. It is important if one wants to be an independent expert to actually be independent. Because one of the problems we know is that if you are in the employ, well, certainly big tobacco and big alcohol and big food, they've all got reputations of buying up researchers and producing research results that favour them. In fact, there's good independent analysis that shows that company-sponsored research always tends to be more favourable for the product than independent research. So no, we need to be independent, and at the very least, if we're not, we need to declare our conflicts of interest so people can make their own conclusions.
I totally agree with you there, Professor. I guess you already answered this question, but I guess I'll just change it a little bit. So why, in your opinion, is the origin of funding an important consideration when it comes to scientific research? And I'd also add, what about pharmaceutical funding? You know, some of these bigger pharmaceutical companies like Pharmacare, if they were to, say, give a university a grant to do a specific research, why would you find that problematic?
Well, for the reasons I've said before, because there are dangers in that. I mean, universities are short of money, thanks to, or unfortunately, thanks to the current government, which has slashed and burned, which is why we then became reliant on foreign students. And that's a crisis because of COVID-19. So, look, if you're dependent upon industry funding, then there is a tendency, either subliminally or openly, to produce results that will make that funding continue. And regrettably, there's good evidence that some university researchers have swallowed that bait and they, as I say, produce results that are more favourable to the company than those who do independent research that haven't got that funding. So it is a temptation, and it's not helped by universities short of funds who want to get into bed with industry. Again, don't get me wrong, there's no fundamental reason why one shouldn't do research with industry, as long as you're aware of the dangers, as long as the protocols are clear-cut and open and the conflicts of interest are clearly described. And then people can make up their own minds. But again, replication of results is crucial, particularly replication of results by independent people is important. So I'm always a little bit cynical and suspicious of research funded by companies with company sort of authors in the first instance.
I find you a kindred spirit on that topic, Professor. My personal opinion is logic, reason is reason, evidence is evidence, and influence is influence. And we should be open about these things, and we should have discussions about these things, and not just block people on Twitter or not conduct interviews when somebody has a question about a paper that comes up, which has happened to me in the past. Going on to the big topic of the day, I mean, my name's Vaporman. You obviously were going to get a question about vaping. What's your personal stance on vaping, Professor?
Oh, look, this is a complicated issue, and I think I've mentioned that the public health community is to some extent polarised and split on this. I mean, on the one hand, I think there is quite good evidence that vaping, and let's talk about vaping nicotine products in the first instance, that these can help people who are addicted to cigarettes, that it can be a transition and a way of getting out of smoking cigarettes. And there's absolutely no doubt that smoking or vaping nicotine-containing products is less harmful than smoking cigarettes for a variety of reasons. So that's the positive side. The other side is concern that, well, they're not entirely risk-free because, you know, although you're not heating up nicotine to the same temperatures that you do in cigarettes, and you're not getting all the nasties that cause lung cancer, you're still getting some nasties that can irritate the mouth and the lungs and whatever. So they're not entirely sort of innocuous. And even more importantly, some of my colleagues feel that there is, again, evidence that kids are taking this up. It becomes sort of socially acceptable. And again, there is some evidence that starting off on e-cigarettes then leads people on to the real thing, which is smoking proper cigarettes. Now, again, I think the evidence on the harms, on the dangers to young people is certainly not conclusive. Needs, as we always say, needs more research. But I think that's why there is some polarization of opinion, and that's why some of the regulators, including the TGA, have sort of come down to say, well, nicotine products, particularly where we're not too sure of the long-term dangers, should be a restricted product, need for a doctor's prescription. Reasonable if you're trying to give up smoking, but probably not so reasonable if you're not. But then again, you can get hold of them through a personal import scheme as long as you've got a doctor's prescription.
Yeah, I appreciate all that, Professor, but the whole children's argument seems a bit weird to me. First of all, more children in this country smoke cigarettes than vaporizers. And if you believe the Big Tobacco Royal College of Physicians in the UK, they say that vaping is 95% safer than smoking. Yeah. From my own personal point of view, I would say, and this may be a bit on the extreme end, but I would say if the current smoking rate of teens, that is 14 to 17-year-olds in this country, went up by 95%, we should only get worried once it goes beyond that. If vaping is as safe as the Royal College of Physicians in the UK says, then this pearl clutching and emotional argument of the children is entirely irrelevant to me. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I think we've got to be, as we keep on saying, we've got to be evidence-based. I don't think there's enough good data on this to see how many kids that get into vaping and get into vaping nicotine go on to more harmful products. The other concern, of course, that people have is that vaping without nicotine, is again not entirely innocuous, but you're heating up flavouring items and bits and pieces. We don't really know the long-term outcomes of that. And so the precautionary principle, which many public health and Royal College of GPs and others go along with, is when in doubt, don't. Okay, I accept that might be a bit extreme, a bit like sort of alcohol. I mean, we're saying the safest thing is don't drink at all, but that's not acceptable to most people because there are benefits in having the odd drink now and again, or even more than the odd one. And so, look, it's a risk-benefit ratio again. I mean, my own view is that if someone wants to give up smoking and they found that the patches and the other things that are available don't help, and they want to try nicotine vaping, fine, go to your GP, get a prescription, import some stuff from a reputable supplier, and give it a go. I'm happy with that as smoking cessation. Should young kids get stuck into it? Well, I would, my own kids are older, they're adults now, but my grandchildren are in that age. And again, I'd say, look, when in doubt, don't. I mean, there are risks there that we're not entirely sure about. So look, I accept all the things that people say, that it's a lower risk than cigarettes. If you want to get off cigarettes, give vaping a go if nothing else has worked. But I wouldn't encourage people to take it up if they don't need, if there's not a reason to do so.
I totally agree with you on the precautionary principle, but you have to remember there's this other thing called smoking. Every single supermarket I drive past, every single service station, and as a nicotine addict myself, I know the temptation and just the ease of getting cigarettes. Yes, they are expensive. Yes, the packs are ugly, but I can get them from anywhere. We're talking about if you want to talk about the precautionary principle, everybody has to wear masks, everybody has to stay home. So far, the death toll of COVID doesn't even get close to the death toll from cigarettes in this country. 21,000 people a year die from cigarettes in this country, and yet we want to regulate far more harshly a at least 95% safer option and still have the other one on regular sale. I completely agree with you. If smoking didn't exist, then sure, let's not have vaping be easily accessible to people until it's been around for 30 years. But that's just not the reality we live in. Your thoughts, Professor?
Now, look, I agree with you. And if one was logical on this, you would take cigarettes out of the locked cabinets of the supermarkets and the petrol stations, and you'd make them available on doctor's prescription. Well, you probably wouldn't, because of the harm. You would probably not have them at all. But this is the real world, and I think political decisions, even medical decisions, are sometimes not logical. It's the art of the possible, isn't it? It's responding to something new rather than something old, or certainly trying to tone down the harms from something old. So look, I agree. If you were starting afresh, it's not logical what we're doing. But, I see it as a pragmatic sort of policy decision, which you can legitimately argue against. But that's what politics is about.
Yeah, and also I can see how it would be a very easy argument to make if you don't fear relapsing to cigarettes, but somebody like Vaporman certainly does. Just in closing, I want to say my position on this is very clear, and it applies not only to smoking and vaping, but to anything. It's just a logical position. If A is less harmful than B, A should be less regulated than B. And if there's a flaw in that logic, I'd invite anybody to point it out. But thank you so much for your time today. What do you have coming up, Professor?
No, look, I think we've covered it all, and I think your arguments are very sound. Unfortunately, as I say, it's not a logical world. Politics isn't logical. The TGA is not logical. It's the art of the possible. It's being pragmatic under with different forces at work. And we sort of try and muddle through in a way that often doesn't satisfy any of us. So hang on in there and keep on going. Who knows? One day logic might triumph.
Thanks, Professor, and you too. Hopefully, I hope to see somebody with principle and logic like you be the head of the TGA one day. But hey, Vaporman's a blind optimist. If you don't know, now you know!